Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are journeying into the glittering, perfumed world of Regency England, where wealth was measured not just in coin but in the number of servants required to dress you each morning. This is a story of silks and secrets, of grand estates and even grander pretensions, of a society so obsessed with appearances that the simple act of eating breakfast could determine your social standing for a generation. What was it truly like to be among the wealthiest in this peculiar age? Why has this era of powdered wigs and pointed manners captured our imaginations for more than 2 centuries? As always, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it for you? And if you enjoy these cozy journeys through history, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Whether you're here to drift into sleep or to follow the currents of history, I'm glad you're with me. How did the rituals of daily life, the unspoken hierarchies, the endless performances of propriety, shape the world of those who lived in marble halls and wanted for nothing except perhaps a moment of genuine peace? We will explore where this world began, in the great houses that rose across the English countryside like monuments to ambition. We will walk through the evidence that remains, the letters, the ledgers, the portraits, with their subjects gazing out with expressions caught between pride and an inexplicable melancholy. And we will see how this glittering society, for all its beauty and wealth, carried within it the seeds of its own transformation. As always, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and what time is it for you. Whether you are here to drift into sleep or to follow the currents of history, I am glad you are with me. Now let us begin. The morning light filters through embroidered drapes, heavy fabric that cost more than a working family might earn in a year. The sunlight arrives slowly, as if even the day itself knows not to rush into a room where time moves at the pace of privilege. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, the world is already awake. Laborers rise before dawn, maids carry water up narrow servant stairs, fires are coaxed to life in kitchens that will produce meals the family upstairs will barely notice. But here in this bedchamber, silence still reigns, a silence so complete it feels almost sacred. The bed is a fortress of fabric. Silk sheets whisper against skin with every slight movement. Goose-down pillows cradle a head that has never known the firmness of straw or the scratch of rough linen. The mattress beneath is not 1 but 3, stacked like layers of a cake, each filled with feathers plucked from birds raised for exactly this purpose. To sleep here is to float, suspended above the hardness of the world. Though even this luxury comes with its complications, the mattresses shift and settle, creating mysterious valleys and unexpected ridges. Somewhere deep within their depths, small creatures have likely made their homes, feeding on the detritus of wealth. The air in the room carries a particular scent, one that speaks of money and its peculiar relationship with cleanliness. There is rose water, dabbed on wrists the night before. There is the smell of beeswax from candles burned down to stubs. There is the faint mustiness of old fabric, because even the finest textiles grow damp in English air, and beneath it all, the human scent that no amount of perfume can entirely mask. The room smells like wealth smells, like layers of fragrance applied to cover the truth that bathing is an ordeal rather than a daily habit. A maid enters, her footsteps soft as prayers on the Persian rug. She moves with practiced silence, having learned long ago that waking the mistress too abruptly can mean a day of cold glances and whispered complaints to the housekeeper. She carries a basin of water, and the porcelain is so fine you can nearly see through it when held to the light. The water itself is cold, drawn from the well before dawn and carried up 3 flights of stairs. It sits in the basin now, still as glass, waiting. The morning wash is a ritual that requires both courage and resignation. There is no steam, no warmth to ease the body into wakefulness. The sponge, when it touches skin, brings a shock that feels almost vindictive, as if the water itself resents being asked to perform this service. You dab at your face, careful not to splash, while the maid stands nearby with a towel embroidered with your family crest. The soap, when it appears, is a small lump of something that smells vaguely of lavender and lye, harsh enough to make your skin protest but gentle enough to be called luxury by those who have known worse. This is how the day begins for the wealthy in Regency England, not with the comfort you might imagine but with small discomforts accepted as the price of status. The cold water reminds you that you are alive. The maid's presence reminds you that you are important enough to require assistance with the simplest tasks. The elaborate ritual of washing, dressing, and preparing to face the world reminds you that your life is not your own, but a performance staged for an audience that never stops watching. Beyond the windows, the estate stretches in all directions. There are gardens where roses grow in colors carefully selected to complement the house. There are stables where horses with bloodlines as carefully documented as any lords stand in stalls lined with fresh straw. There are tenant farms where families work land they will never own, paying rent to a landlord they might glimpse once or twice a year during ceremonial visits. All of this belongs to the family sleeping in these grand rooms, and yet in a deeper sense the family belongs to it, bound by obligation and expectation to maintain what their ancestors built. The household awakens in layers like an orchestra tuning before a performance. First the servants rise, those invisible hands that make the visible world possible. The scullery maid is already scrubbing pots in water that turns her fingers raw. The boot boy is polishing leather until it gleams. The cook is assessing the day's provisions, mentally calculating what can be stretched and what must be replenished, always aware that waste will be noted but so will any shortage. Above them, the upper servants are beginning their own preparations. The butler checks his keys, his face a mask of professional serenity that hides whatever thoughts or dreams or disappointments live beneath. The housekeeper walks the halls with her enormous ring of keys jangling like a warning bell, her eyes catching every speck of dust, every crooked picture frame, every sign that her domain is anything less than perfect. And finally, last of all, the family themselves begin to stir. They rise not to work, but to the work of being themselves, of maintaining the fiction that their lives are effortless, that wealth brings ease when in truth it brings only a different kind of labor. The labor of appearing, of performing, of never letting anyone see the effort it takes to look as though no effort is required at all. The morning light grows stronger now, spilling across floorboards that servants will polish until they reflect like water. It touches the portraits on the walls, those stern-faced ancestors who seem to watch with judgment or perhaps with pity. It warms the heavy curtains and makes the dust motes visible, tiny particles dancing in the air, indifferent to wealth or poverty, present everywhere humans live and breathe. This is the world we are stepping into tonight. A world of beauty built on labor, of comfort purchased at the cost of complexity, of lives lived in public even in the most private moments. The Regency wealthy inhabited houses that were theaters, where every room was a stage and every interaction a carefully choreographed scene. They wore their wealth like armor, layer upon layer of silk and status, protecting themselves from a world that was changing faster than they could control. The water in the basin grows still again after the morning ablutions. The maid carries it away, moving through corridors that exist in a kind of parallel dimension. Servant spaces designed to be invisible to the family. These passages are narrower, darker, their walls unadorned. They are the backstage of the grand performance, where the machinery of luxury is maintained by those who will never fully enjoy its benefits. In the bedchamber, the mistress of the house begins the lengthy process of becoming presentable. This is not a task she can accomplish alone. The garments of the era are designed to require assistance, as if to remind the wearer at every moment of their dependence on others, of their place in a hierarchy that stretches from the lowest scullery maid to the highest nobility. First comes the shift, a simple linen undergarment that is perhaps the only straightforward piece of clothing she will wear all day. Then the corset, that instrument of transformation that will reshape her body into the silhouette demanded by fashion. The corset is a marvel of engineering and endurance. Boned with strips of whalebone or steel, it is designed to compress, to mold, to create a shape that nature never intended. The maid laces it with practiced hands, pulling the strings tight while her mistress grips the bedpost and holds her breath. There is a moment, always, when breathing seems impossible, when the body rebels against this restriction. And then somehow the body adjusts. The lungs learn to take smaller breaths. The ribs learn to exist in a smaller space. The mind learns to ignore the constant pressure, the persistent discomfort that will be her companion until night falls and the whole process can be reversed. Over the corset come the petticoats, layer upon layer of fabric designed to give the skirt its proper shape and volume. Each one is tied at the waist, adding weight and warmth. In summer this becomes its own kind of torture, but fashion does not bend to seasons. Then comes the dress itself, lowered over her head with ceremony, its sleeves guided onto her arms with care. The fabric is fine muslin or silk, imported at great expense, dyed in colors achieved through processes that remain mysterious, even to those who can afford the results. The ritual continues. Stockings are rolled up her legs, held in place by garters. Shoes are slipped onto her feet, delicate things with thin soles that will offer no protection from the realities of walking. A shawl is draped across her shoulders. Jewelry is selected, each piece carrying its own history and significance. And finally, the hair, that crowning achievement that will require another hour at least to arrange into the intricate styles the era demands. While one woman undergoes this transformation, her husband faces his own ordeal in another chamber. Men's clothing is no less complex, no less demanding. There are small clothes and breeches, stockings that must be pulled smooth without a single wrinkle. There is the shirt with its high collar, the waistcoat with its precise buttons. And then there is the cravat, that notorious strip of fabric that has inspired entire manuals on proper tying techniques. His valet stands ready, a second pair of hands essential for achieving the perfect knot, the ideal fold, the look of casual perfection that actually requires meticulous effort. The cravat is more than decoration. It is a test of character, a daily trial that separates the gentleman from the merely wealthy. Too loose and you appear slovenly, careless, perhaps even revolutionary in your disregard for standards. Too tight and you risk fainting, which carries its own social complications. The perfect cravat must be tight enough to hold its shape throughout the day's activities, loose enough to allow blood to reach the brain, and elegant enough to suggest that its wearer gave the matter no thought whatsoever. Breakfast awaits, but first there must be this preparation. First there must be this donning of armor disguised as fashion. Because to appear at the breakfast table improperly dressed would be a failure, more serious than arriving late or speaking out of turn. The clothing is the message. It announces your place, your taste, your understanding of the unspoken rules that govern every moment of life among the wealthy. The house itself seems to hold its breath during these morning preparations, waiting for the family to emerge from their private chambers and take up their public roles. Fires burn in grates throughout the building, tended by servants who move like ghosts, their presence necessary but their visibility undesirable. The smell of coal smoke mixes with the scent of baking bread drifting up from the kitchens far below. Somewhere a clock chimes the hour, its sound echoing through rooms, designed to impress visitors who have not yet arrived. This is the foundation upon which the day will build. These private rituals performed in bedchambers and dressing rooms, these acts of transformation that turn sleeping bodies into social beings. The Regency wealthy did not simply wake and dress, they prepared for performance, armoring themselves in fabric and propriety before stepping onto the stage that was their daily life. And as the morning light grows stronger, as the household moves from the stillness of sleep into the activity of day, as servants complete their invisible labors and family members complete their visible preparation, the great machinery of Regency wealth begins to turn once more, grinding forward through another day of beauty and burden, privilege and performance, comfort and unspoken constraint. The dining room awaits like a chapel prepared for morning service. The table stretches longer than necessary for the number who will occupy it, its surface reflecting the light from windows that face east to catch the first sun. Place settings are arranged with geometric precision, each fork and knife positioned according to rules written nowhere but enforced everywhere. The china bears the family crest, a reminder at every meal of lineage and legacy. The silverware catches the light and throws it back in small bright bursts, each piece polished by hands that will never use them for eating. The family enters not all at once but in careful sequence, each arrival noted and interpreted by those already seated. The master of the house takes his place at the head, his chair larger than the others, his position a statement of authority that requires no words. His wife sits at the opposite end, distant enough that conversation between them must be projected across the geography of mahogany and crystal. Between them, children and relations arrange themselves according to an order that everyone understands but no one has to explain. Breakfast itself is a meal of startling abundance for people who have done nothing yet to earn hunger. There are eggs, soft boiled in their porcelain cups, waiting to be decapitated with small precise taps of a spoon. There are rashers of bacon, sausages glistening with fat, kidneys for those with strong constitutions and stronger stomachs. There are towers of toast going cold even as they arrive, accompanied by a squadron of preserves in cut glass dishes. Butter sits in small pats on small plates, already softening in the warmth of the room. Tea is poured from pots that require two hands to lift, the dark liquid steaming as it fills cups so delicate they seem to whisper warnings against careless handling. The tea itself has traveled across oceans to reach this table, carried in ships that will never be discussed in this room, purchased with money generated by enterprises that remain politely vague in conversation. It is simply tea, as if it materialized through will, rather than commerce, as if the complex machinery of empire could be reduced to a pleasant morning beverage. Coffee makes its appearance as well, for those who favor it, thick and dark and faintly bitter. Hot chocolate arrives in special pots, the drink so rich it leaves a coating on the tongue, sweet and heavy, and utterly impractical for anyone planning to accomplish anything more strenuous than a gentle stroll. The choice of beverage becomes a small declaration of character, a preference that others will note and file away for future reference. The food is presented by footmen who move in coordinated silence, their livery identical, their faces carefully blank. They offer dishes with outstretched arms, waiting while each diner selects portions or waves them away. The servants see everything. They notice who eats heartily and who picks at their plate. They observe who speaks and who maintains silence. They witness the small tensions that ripple across the table, the slight frown when a son slouches, the raised eyebrow when a daughter reaches for a third piece of toast. All of this information flows downstairs later, traded in the servants' hall like currency, building a parallel narrative of family life that exists in whispered asides and knowing glances. Conversation at breakfast is governed by unwritten law. Topics must be light, uncontroversial, suitable for the delicate morning constitution. The weather is always acceptable, discussed with a seriousness that might seem absurd if it were not so utterly sincere. Rain or shine, fog or clear skies, the state of the atmosphere provides endless material for consideration and comment. The gardens may be mentioned, their condition noted, improvements suggested with the vague assumption that someone else will implement them. News from beyond the estate arrives in the form of letters carried in on silver salvers, their seals broken with knives kept for exactly this purpose. A letter from town might introduce the first hint of excitement into the meal, though its contents will be carefully edited in the telling. News of acquaintances, of social events planned or completed, of minor scandals rendered suitable for mixed company. Some letters are read aloud, their words shared with the table. Others are tucked away to be consumed in private, their secrets kept close. The younger members of the family navigate breakfast with particular care, aware that their behavior here will be reported and assessed. Posture must be maintained, a straight back that never touches the chair's support. Chewing must be quiet, conducted behind closed lips, swallowing accomplished without visible effort. Speaking is permitted but must never interrupt, must wait for the natural pause in conversation that signals an opening. A child who masters breakfast etiquette is a child who can be trusted in society. A child who cannot manage a boiled egg without disaster is a child who requires additional training before being presented to the wider world. There are small rebellions even here, tiny assertions of independence disguised as accidents. A fork dropped with just enough noise to interrupt a boring story. A cough that arrives at the precise moment when an unwelcome question is asked. These acts of minor subversion are noted by siblings with hidden smiles, by parents with narrowed eyes, by servants with carefully maintained neutrality. The breakfast table is a training ground for the larger social battles that await beyond the dining room doors. The meal progresses through its appointed stages. Early courses give way to later ones. The urgency of hunger, if it ever existed, fades into the contentment of fullness. Plates are cleared away as soon as they are abandoned, whisked off to the netherworld of the kitchen, where they will be washed and dried and returned to cabinets to wait for the next performance. Fresh pots of tea arrive to replace those that have grown lukewarm. The butter is removed, having surrendered to the room's temperature, and melted into something approaching liquid. Time at breakfast moves differently than it does in the world beyond the estate walls. Here there is no hurry, no pressing engagement that cannot be delayed. The family lingers because they can, because time is one of the many luxuries they possess in abundance. A working family would have eaten and dispersed by now, off to fields or workshops or whatever labor sustains them. But the wealthy breakfast with the leisure of those who have nowhere they must be, nothing they must do, at least nothing that cannot be delegated or deferred. Eventually, though, even this meal must end. The patriarch rises first, his movement a signal that permission has been granted for others to depart. Napkins are folded and left beside plates, Chairs are pushed back with care to avoid scraping the polished floor. The family disperses to their various pursuits, or more accurately, to their various ways of avoiding pursuit. The dining room empties and the servants descend upon it, clearing away the remains of breakfast with efficient speed, erasing the evidence of the meal until the room stands ready for whatever comes next. In the hours between breakfast and the midday meal, the house settles into a rhythm of quiet activity. The family occupies itself with the serious business of doing very little. In the drawing room, women gather with their needlework, though the actual sewing accomplished in these sessions is negligible compared to the conversation exchanged. Embroidery hoops hold fabric stretched taut. Needles move in and out. Thread in colors that must coordinate with everything else in the room, create slow patterns that may or may not ever be completed. The work itself is not the point. The point is the gathering, the opportunity for talk that ranges from harmless to harmful depending on who has most recently provided material for discussion. Last night's dinner party is dissected and analyzed. The guest list is reviewed, each name triggering a cascade of commentary. Who sat where and what that placement signified. Who spoke to whom and what secret alliances or emerging feuds those conversations might indicate. What was served and whether it met the standards expected of a house of that standing. Fashion receives particular scrutiny. A new gown worn by a rival draws intense study. Every detail noted and judged. The color was perhaps a shade too bold. The trim was certainly excessive. The fit suggested either a very skilled dressmaker or a very desperate attempt to appear slimmer than nature intended. Hair arrangements are evaluated with the seriousness of military strategists assessing enemy positions. Jewelry is inventoried from memory, each piece's origins traced if possible, its value estimated, its appropriateness to the occasion debated. These conversations follow patterns worn smooth by repetition. The same observations made about different subjects, the same conclusions reached with the same satisfied air of having discovered something profound. And yet the talk continues because there is pleasure in it, a comfort in the familiar rhythms of judgment and speculation. The needles move slowly through fabric, the morning light shifts across the room as the sun climbs higher. Tea is ordered and arrives and is consumed with the same ritual care as breakfast's offerings. The men of the house occupy themselves differently though no more productively. Some retreat to the library, that masculine sanctuary, where books line walls from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings creating a wall of muted color and the faint smell of old paper. Here a gentleman might select a volume with great ceremony, settle into a leather chair worn smooth by generations of similar readers, and promptly fall asleep with the book open on his lap. This is considered an acceptable, even admirable way to pass the morning. Others might venture to the estate office, that room where the actual business of wealth is supposed to be conducted. Ledgers wait on the desk, their pages filled with columns of figures that represent rents collected, expenses paid, the endless accounting of what comes in and what goes out. The estate steward may be summoned to provide reports on matters requiring attention, tenants in need of assistance, repairs that cannot be delayed, decisions about planting and harvest that must be made soon if they are to be made at all. But often these meetings are brief, the landlord nodding at intervals while understanding little and caring less about the details. The steward has learned to present only what absolutely requires approval, to handle everything else on his own authority, to protect his employer from the tedious realities of land management. The arrangement suits both parties. The steward maintains control over the practical matters he understands. The landlord maintains the fiction that he is involved in the running of his own estate. Some mornings bring visitors, those carefully orchestrated social calls that serve multiple purposes at once. Neighbors arrive in their carriages, announced by servants who somehow know in advance when to expect them, as if the network of households maintains its own communication system invisible to those it serves. Some of callers are shown into the drawing room where they will be received with a carefully calibrated degree of warmth depending on their standing and the current state of relations between families. These visits follow scripts that everyone knows by heart, compliments on the room's appointments, inquiries about health and family, observations about the weather and the state of the roads. Refreshments are offered and accepted, though often left untouched except for polite sips and nibbles. The real purpose of the visit may never be stated directly. It might be to assess the competition, to gather intelligence for later gossip, to maintain alliances, to probe for weakness or opportunity, Or it might be nothing more than the simple need to see and be seen, to confirm one's place in the social order through these ritual encounters. The morning wears on and the house grows warmer, as fires burn in every occupied room, and the sun climbs toward midday. In the kitchens far below, preparations for the next meal are already underway. The cook consults her mental calendar of menus, rotating dishes to prevent repetition while ensuring that nothing too adventurous makes its way upstairs. The scullery maids scrub vegetables pulled from the kitchen garden that morning, their hands moving in rhythm, their talk flowing easily in this space where formality loosens its grip. The house exists in layers like a cake, each level living its own version of the day. Above stairs, the family drifts through rooms too large for their actual needs, occupying space because they can, because the possession of unused rooms is itself a form of wealth. Below stairs, the servants move through passages designed for efficiency rather than beauty, carrying out the tasks that make the upper world possible. And in between, in those in-between spaces, in hallways and on staircases, the two worlds sometimes intersect, servants stepping aside to let family pass, eyes downcast, bodies pressed against walls, making themselves as invisible as flesh can manage. The estate grounds offer their own theatre of morning activity. Gardeners work among the flower beds, their labor creating beauty that will be viewed from windows but rarely approached. The blooms they tend are arranged in patterns, colors orchestrated like music, heights and shapes balanced with an artist's eye. This is not the practical gardening of vegetable plots, though those exist as well, hidden away, where their utilitarian purpose will not offend aesthetic sensibilities. This is decorative gardening, nature bent to the will of design, wildness tamed into approved forms, paths wound through the grounds, gravel crunching underfoot, raked smooth each morning by unseen hands, benches wait at intervals, placed to offer views across lawns that stretch like green carpets, trimmed so perfectly they seem unreal. Water features trickle and splash, their sounds meant to soothe, to create the impression of natural springs when in fact complex plumbing brings water from distant sources and channels it through carefully constructed courses. The stable's house horse is worth more than most people will earn in a lifetime. Each animal is groomed daily, its coat brushed until it gleams, its hooves picked clean, its tack polished to mirror brightness. The horses are exercised on schedules, ridden by those who have never known the utility of a horse as transportation, only as recreation or display. Some are carriage horses, matched pairs selected for color and temperament, trained to move in perfect synchrony. Others are riding horses, each with its own personality, its own quirks known intimately by the grooms who care for them. There are dogs as well, not working dogs but companions, breeds chosen for appearance or fashion, or simply because everyone else has them. They lounge in designated areas, fed special diets, attended by servants who find the work preferable to some alternatives. The dogs are walked at appointed hours, their routes planned to avoid dirtying their paws before they return indoors. Some of them wear collars studded with small jewels, a touch of absurdity that no one questions because absurdity and wealth have always been close companions. As midday approaches, the pace of the house quickens slightly, though to an outside observer the change would be barely perceptible. It is more a shift in energy than activity, a collective awareness that the day is moving forward. Letters that were started in the morning are finished and sealed, wax melted and stamped with signet rings, the impressions leaving marks that carry authority and identity. Servants carry these letters away to be posted, beginning their journeys to destinations near and far. The morning's reading is set aside, books marked and closed, newspapers folded. The needlework is put away in baskets lined with silk, the morning's minimal progress preserved for tomorrow's equally minimal advancement. Hair that has loosened over the course of the morning is retouched, pins adjusted, curls coaxed back into place. A glance in the mirror confirms that the presentation remains acceptable, that the face shown to the world still meets the standards expected. The dining room is prepared once more, the table reset for a midday meal that will be lighter than dinner but still substantial, still ceremonial. Cold meats are sliced and arranged on platters. Pies arrive from the kitchen, their crusts golden, their fillings mysterious until cut. Cheese is brought from the dairy, its aging carefully monitored to achieve exactly the right sharpness. Bread is baked fresh for this meal, the smell of it drifting through the house. one of the few pleasant domestic scents in a building that works hard to smell of nothing at all. The household begins its slow convergence on the dining room once more. This is a smaller gathering than breakfast, less formal though still governed by rules and expectations. The conversation is permitted to be slightly livelier. The topics a touch broader. The meal itself passes more quickly, everyone aware that the afternoon stretches ahead with its own demands and opportunities. After this midday meal, the house enters its quietest phase. This is the hour when even the pretense of activity is abandoned, when the wealthy retreat to private rooms for rest that masquerades as delicate health. The drawing room empties. The library sees its chairs occupied by sleeping forms, books sliding forgotten to the floor. In bedchambers throughout the house, people lie down fully clothed, trusting servants to wake them at the appointed hour, surrendering to the exhaustion that comes from doing so very little. The afternoon nap is a sacred institution, defended vigorously against any suggestion that it represents laziness. It is framed instead as necessity, a restoration of energies depleted by the morning's exertions. That those exertions consisted mainly of eating and sitting is not acknowledged. The nap happens because it has always happened, because the rhythm of the day demands this pause, this withdrawal from even the minimal engagement the morning required. While the family sleeps, the servants maintain their labors. This is their opportunity to work in the main rooms without interruption, to accomplish tasks that are easier when the spaces are empty. Carpets are beaten, raising clouds of dust that speak to the impossibility of true cleanliness in these vast spaces. Windows are washed, the glass polished until it nearly disappears. Furniture is shifted and the floors beneath it cleaned. Then everything returned to its exact previous position because any deviation would be noticed and remarked upon. In the kitchens, preparation for dinner begins in earnest. This evening meal is the day's centerpiece, the performance that matters most. The cook plans courses like a general plans campaigns, each dish timed to arrive at the perfect moment, each flavor balanced against what precedes and follows it. Ingredients are assembled, examined, approved, or rejected. The fireplace becomes a roaring beast, its heat oppressive but necessary. Assistant cooks work at tables, chopping and grinding and mixing, their hands moving with practiced speed. Scullery maids wash pots as quickly as they are dirtied, knowing that each pot will be needed again soon, that the cycle never truly ends. The kitchen fills with steam and smoke, with the smells of roasting meat and baking pastry, with the controlled chaos of professional cooking conducted under pressure. And through it all, the cook maintains order through force of will and volume, her voice cutting through the noise to direct, to correct, to demand better from those who work under her command. The afternoon wears on and the light begins to change, the sun sliding toward the western horizon, the quality of illumination shifting from the harsh brightness of midday to something softer, more forgiving. The sleepers in their various rooms begin to stir, some waking naturally, others roused by servants who tap gently at doors and announce the hour in voices carefully modulated to be heard without startling. There is time now before dinner for another transformation, another changing of clothes because the garments worn through the day are not suitable for evening. The process of dressing begins again, though mercifully shortened by the fact that some undergarments can remain. Still there are new gowns to don, new waistcoats to button, hair to be rearranged, jewelry to be changed. The evening self must be distinct from the afternoon self, more formal, more impressive, prepared for the possibility of guests even if none are expected. The drawing room fills again as family members emerge from their private preparations. There is tea again, because there is always tea. An endless rotation of pots and cups and small portions of cake. Conversation resumes, picking up threads from the morning or introducing new topics gathered from letters received or thoughts formulated during the afternoon's rest. The talk flows around and around, circular and repetitive, comforting in its predictability. As the hour for dinner approaches, there is a subtle shift in energy once more. People position themselves near the dining room without appearing too eager. They wait for the signal that the meal is ready, that the table is set, that the first course stands prepared to be served. When it comes, the migration happens smoothly, everyone knowing their place, taking their seat without confusion or consultation. Dinner in a wealthy Regency home is theatre at its most elaborate. The table is transformed into a landscape of plenty, covered with dishes in such number that they cannot all possibly be consumed. There are soups and removes, fish and fowl, meats roasted and meats in sauces, vegetables cooked into submission, jellies that shimmer in the candlelight, towers of confection that seem to defy gravity. The display is the point as much as the consumption, a demonstration of resources, of kitchen staff capability, of the family's place in the hierarchy of wealth. The meal unfolds over hours. Courses arrive and are cleared, each transition marked by a brief pause during which the table is reset, fresh plates distributed, new silverware produced from seemingly endless supplies. The footmen move with coordinated precision, their movements almost dance-like in their synchronization. They lean between diners to offer dishes, retreat to the walls when not needed, advance again when signaled by the butler's subtle gestures. Conversation at dinner is more animated than at breakfast, lubricated by wine that flows freely, refilled the moment a glass approaches empty. The topics range wider now, emboldened by alcohol and the comfort of evening. Stories are told, some true, some embroidered beyond recognition. News from London is shared and analyzed, every detail picked apart for significance. Local gossip makes its appearance, names dropped like stones into still water, the ripples spreading as others add their observations and interpretations. There are always small disasters, minor catastrophes that will be recounted later, with laughter or horror depending on their nature. A sauce spilled on a tablecloth, a coughing fit that interrupts a toast, a disagreement that edges too close to actual argument before someone intervenes with a change of subject. These moments break the tedium, provide the material for future storytelling, add texture to what might otherwise be just another evening of excess. The final course arrives, dessert in forms both solid and liquid. Fruits from the estate's hot houses, nuts to be cracked with special implements, wines sweet enough to mask their strength. Conversation begins to fragment as fullness makes sustained attention difficult. Some diners toy with their food, others abandon pretense and simply wait for permission to withdraw. When the ladies rise to retire to the drawing room, they do so with practiced grace despite the constraints of their clothing and the effects of the wine. They leave behind the men who will linger over port and brandy, whose conversation will turn to topics deemed unsuitable for feminine ears, politics, business, crude jokes that would not be tolerated in mixed company. The women know this and do not care, grateful for the opportunity to loosen their own conversation, to discuss matters the men would find tedious or threatening. In the drawing room, tea appears yet again, as if the household exists in a permanent state of tea service. The women settle into chairs with visible relief, some kicking off shoes the moment they are certain no one is watching. The talk turns naturally to the dinner itself, to critique and analysis of what was served and how it compared to other dinners at other houses. From there it drifts to plans and schemes, to upcoming events, to the eternal question of what to wear and who will be there to see it. Time passes and eventually the men rejoin them, flushed with drink and cigars, their voices slightly louder than necessary. The mixed company creates a new dynamic, slightly more careful than the single-gender conversations that preceded it. Some attempt music, someone is pressed to play the pianoforte while others gather around to sing, the quality of the performance less important than the participation. Cards may emerge, games played for small stakes or no stakes at all, the goal being diversion rather than profit. As the evening deepens toward night, the energy begins to flag. Yawns are stifled, eyes grow heavy, conversation loses its spark. One by one, family members make their excuses and withdraw, heading to their chambers where the whole elaborate process of undressing awaits. The servants who have been waiting at the margins spring into action, clearing glasses and straightening cushions, preparing rooms for the night ahead. In the bedchambers, the day's finery is removed piece by piece, each garment requiring as much care in its removal as it did in its donning. Jewelry is returned to boxes, dresses are hung or folded, shoes are set aside for cleaning, the corsets are unlaced with sighs of relief, bodies expanding gratefully into the space they were denied all day. Night clothes replace day clothes, simple compared to what came before, designed for comfort rather than display. Servants bring warming pans to chase the chill from sheets, the metal containers filled with hot coals run between the layers of bedding to create pockets of warmth. The fires in the grates are banked for the night, burning low but not extinguished, providing enough heat to keep the worst cold at bay. Chamber pots are placed within easy reach, their presence a concession to the fact that indoor plumbing remains a distant dream. Hair is brushed out, the elaborate styles of the day dismantled, tangles worked free with patience. Faces are washed again in basins of cold water, The day's accumulation of powder and sweat removed as best it can be. Teeth are scrubbed with preparations of dubious effectiveness. Prayers are recited from memory. And finally, the bed beckons. Climbing into a Regency bed is like scaling a small mountain. The mattresses are stacked so high that steps or stools are sometimes required to reach the sleeping surface. Once achieved, the body sinks into feathers, surrounded by pillows, covered with layers of blankets and quilts that press down with comforting weight. Bed curtains can be drawn for privacy and warmth, creating a small fabric room within the larger room, a cocoon against the night. And here at last, in the darkness and quiet, with only the sounds of the house settling and the distant city beyond the estate walls, sleep comes to the wealthy of Regency England. It comes after a day of ritual and performance, of eating too much and doing too little, of maintaining appearances and judging others for failing to do the same. It comes to bodies constrained by fashion and minds constrained by expectation, to people who have everything except perhaps the freedom to be anything other than what they are. The night passes in the mansion as it passes everywhere, indifferent to wealth and poverty alike. Dreams visit the sleepers, dreams that may offer escape or simply replay the day's events with slight variations. Servants in their attic rooms or basement quarters sleep the heavier sleep of physical exhaustion, their rest interrupted by the knowledge that dawn will come too soon and the whole cycle will begin again. In the stables, horses shift in their stalls and settle. In the gardens, frost begins to form if the season is right, delicate crystals building on leaf edges, transforming the carefully planned landscapes into something briefly wild and beautiful. The house itself creaks and sighs, wood expanding and contracting with temperature changes, old joints settling. The sounds familiar enough to be ignored by those who have lived here long enough to learn the building's vocabulary. This is the rhythm of life among the Regency wealthy, a rhythm of excess and emptiness, beauty and burden. They live in monuments to human ambition and human folly, surrounded by objects of exquisite craftsmanship and questionable necessity. They are waited upon at every moment yet remain somehow isolated, their lives so cushioned by privilege that they rarely touch the harder edges of existence. The money that sustains all of this flows from sources they need never examine too closely. Rents from tenant farms, investments in enterprises they cannot describe, inheritances passed down through generations, each accumulation building on the last. The wealth is both blessing and trap, providing every material comfort while demanding constant vigilance to maintain status, to meet expectations, to defend position against rivals equally determined to advance their own standing. There is an emptiness at the center of all this plenty, a hollowness that no amount of silk can fill. The days blur into sameness despite the variety of activities. The same conversations repeat with different participants. The same rituals are observed with the same careful attention to detail. And through it all runs the awareness that this cannot last forever, that change is coming whether wanted or not, that the world beyond the estate walls moves at a different pace, and in directions that may not honor the old hierarchies. But these thoughts, when they surface, are pushed down again, dismissed as melancholy or indigestion. There is dinner to dress for, calls to make, letters to write, scandals to dissect. The machinery of wealth grinds forward, pulling everyone along in its wake. Servants and served alike, all bound to their roles in this elaborate production. The seasons turn and the great houses stand witness, their walls absorbing generations of voices, their floors worn smooth by countless footsteps. The families come and go, births and deaths, marriages and scandals, fortunes made and lost. The servants turn over as well, young ones arriving with hope, old ones departing with bad backs and fading memories. The estates themselves persist, passing from one generation to the next, each inheritor receiving both blessing and burden, the pride of ownership and the weight of obligation. In drawing rooms throughout England, in dining rooms and ballrooms, in libraries and gardens, the wealthy of the Regency era live out their days in this strange mixture of privilege and constraint. They are envied and criticized, admired and mocked, but mostly they are simply themselves, humans trying to make sense of lives that give them everything except perhaps the one thing that matters most, the freedom to choose a different way of being. The candles burn down in their holders, wax pooling and hardening, light dimming. The fires in the grates collapse into embers, glowing red in the darkness. The house grows quiet, except for the sounds that buildings make at night, the settling and creaking, the whisper of drafts through gaps around windows and doors. And in this quiet, In this darkness, the great performance of wealth pauses, waiting for dawn and the signal to begin again. Morning will come as it always does, light creeping across the landscape, touching first the highest points and working its way down into valleys and gardens. Servants will rise before the sun, starting fires, carrying water, beginning the endless cycle of tasks that make the visible world possible. The family will wake later, stretching in their soft beds, ringing for assistance, beginning once more the process of becoming the people they are expected to be. There will be breakfast, with its careful seating and careful conversation. There will be letters and calls, needlework and novels, walks in the garden and naps in the afternoon. There will be dinner with its pageantry and wine, its hours of eating and drinking and talking. And then there will be night again, and the dismantling of the day's construction, and sleep in those high soft beds. This is how time passes in the world of Regency wealth, moving in circles rather than lines, each day essentially like the last, differentiated only by small variations that take on outsized importance precisely because so little else changes. It is a life of routine disguised as variety, of constraints disguised as freedom, of constant performance disguised as natural grace. And perhaps that is the final truth of this world, that it is all performance, all theatre, all elaborate pretense. The wealth is real enough, measured in land and gold and objects of beauty, but the lives built on that foundation are constructions as carefully designed as any stage set, as carefully maintained as any actor's costume. Remove the props and the costumes, strip away the rituals and expectations, and what remains are simply people, no different in their fundamental nature from those who serve them, or those who labor in fields they will never see. But that recognition, if it comes at all, comes only in the quiet moments, in the space between sleep and waking, in the instant before the performance begins again. Because to truly acknowledge it, to act upon it, would require dismantling everything, questioning every assumption, rebuilding from foundations up, and that is too much to ask, too frightening to contemplate, too revolutionary to be born. So the performance continues, generation after generation, each playing their part, each adding their small variations to the eternal themes. The houses stand and the servants serve, and the wealthy live out their constrained and cushioned lives, neither fully happy nor fully aware of their unhappiness, caught in a web of their own weaving, sustained by systems they did not create, and cannot imagine changing. The night deepens in the great house. The last candle is snuffed. The last fire burns down to ash. Sleep claims everyone, from the master in his high bed to the scullery maid on her straw mattress. Dreams come to all, democratic in their visitation if nothing else. And in those dreams, perhaps there is freedom that day denies. Spaces where the rules can be broken and the roles abandoned, where a different kind of life becomes briefly, impossibly possible. But morning comes as it must, and the dreams fade, and the day begins again, and the great wheel of Regency life turns forward, carrying everyone along, grinding fine or grinding rough, but always grinding, always moving, always demanding that the show go on. The estate at dawn is wrapped in mist that clings to the low places, filling hollows and settling in the folds of the land like smoke too heavy to rise. The air carries a dampness that will burn off by mid-morning, leaving the ground dry enough for walking but not so dry that dust rises from the paths. In the kitchen garden, vegetables glisten with dew, each leaf and stem outlined in tiny droplets that catch what little light filters through the clouds. The gardeners are already moving among the rows, pulling weeds before they can take hold, tying up plants that have grown heavy with fruit or leaf, checking for the insects that come in the night to feast on what humans have planted for themselves. The seasons move through the estate with rhythms older than the house itself, older than any human claim to this particular patch of earth. Spring comes with its explosion of growth, everything green and urgent and reaching toward the sun. The carefully planned gardens burst into bloom on schedule, tulips and daffodils giving way to roses and peonies, each flower bed a study in controlled wilderness. In the orchards beyond the formal grounds, apple and pear trees wear clouds of white and pink blossoms that will, if the frost holds off, if the bees do their work, if fortune favors the season, become fruit by late summer. Summer brings heat that settles into the stones of the house and radiates back long after sunset. The rooms grow stifling despite the servants' best efforts with open windows and drawn curtains. The The family complains of the warmth while wearing layers of clothing that would be absurd in any other context, refusing to adapt fashion to weather because to do so would be to admit that comfort might matter more than appearance. They retreat to the coolest rooms, those that face north or those shaded by ancient trees whose branches were allowed to grow close to the building precisely for this purpose. The gardens in summer are a different creature entirely from their spring selves. The early delicate blooms have given way to bolder flowers, brighter colors, shapes that seem almost aggressive in their insistence on being noticed. The grass, kept so carefully trimmed, grows faster than the gardeners can cut it, turning brown in patches where the sun beats down most relentlessly, or where foot traffic has worn it thin. Water becomes precious, carried in buckets from wells and streams to keep the most important plantings alive, while others are left to survive on whatever rain falls, which in some summers is plentiful, and in others is nearly nothing at all. Autumn arrives with a gradual cooling, temperatures dropping degree by degree until one morning you wake to find your breath visible in the bedchamber, the fire having burned too low in the night to keep the chill at bay. The leaves on the estate's many trees begin their transformation, green fading to yellow and orange and red, creating a landscape that seems to glow from within when the sun strikes it at the right angle. There is beauty in this dying, a splendor that makes up for the melancholy of watching another year wind down toward darkness and cold. The harvest comes in autumn, the fields beyond the ornamental grounds yielding up what was planted months before. Wheat and barley, oats and rye, all cut by laborers who move through the fields with scythes, their rhythm steady and ancient, unchanged by centuries. The grain is bundled and carted away to barns where it will be threshed and stored, some portion kept for the estate's own use, the rest sold. The family sees none of this work directly, receives only reports filtered through stewards and bailiffs, numbers in ledgers that translate labor into pounds and shillings and pence. Winter descends like a slow catastrophe, cold seeping into everything, finding its way through gaps and cracks, settling into corners where no fire can reach. The house becomes a fortress against the weather, doors sealed with heavy curtains, windows covered with shutters, every opening blocked against the wind that howls around the eaves and rattles the glass in its frames. Snow falls and transforms the landscape into something unfamiliar. The careful geometry of paths and gardens buried under white, all distinctions erased until the world becomes one smooth frozen expanse. The family draws inward during winter, their world contracting to the rooms that can be kept warm, their activities limited by short days and long nights. There are fewer visitors because travel becomes treacherous, roads turn to mud by thaw and freeze cycles, carriages stuck in ruts that harden overnight into permanent obstacles. The isolation can feel oppressive or liberating depending on temperament and circumstances. The same walls that protect becoming walls that confine. Through all these seasons, the household maintains its routines with only minor adjustments for weather or temperature. Meals are served at the same hours regardless of whether the sun is up or down. Clothing is changed according to the same schedule, though the fabrics shift from light to heavy and back again. The servants continue their endless labor, their work actually increasing in winter, as fires must be constantly tended, snow cleared from paths, ice broken in water barrels that freeze overnight despite being brought indoors. The estate itself persists through seasons and years, through generations of families and servants, through periods of prosperity and decline. The land remains even as those who claim ownership of it come and go, each convinced of their permanent connection to soil and stone that will outlast them all. The trees grow older and thicker, their roots reaching deeper, their branches spreading wider. The walls of the house settle and shift, cracks appearing and being repaired, mortar crumbling and being replaced, the building in a constant state of maintained decay. Money flows through this world like water through a mill, driving the machinery that keeps everything turning. Rents come in from tenant farmers whose families have worked the same plots for generations, paying for the privilege of growing food on land they will never own. The amounts are fixed by custom and negotiation, adjusted periodically to reflect changing circumstances or more often the landlord's need for increased income. The collection of rents is its own ritual, the steward making his rounds on appointed days, receiving payments in coin or in kind, noting in his ledger who has paid and who has not, who has paid in full and who has promised the remainder next month or next quarter. The money collected disappears almost as quickly as it arrives, absorbed by the endless expenses of maintaining status and property. There are the household costs, the wages for servants that must be paid quarterly, the bills from tradesmen who provide meat and wine and candles and coal. There are the maintenance costs, repairs to buildings that can never quite be deferred as long as prudence would suggest, improvements demanded by fashion or necessity or simple pride. There are the social costs, the entertainments that must be hosted, the gifts that must be given, the contributions to charities that serve as public demonstrations of virtue and wealth. Beyond these regular predictable expenses lie the extraordinary ones, the costs that arrive without warning and cannot be refused. A daughter's wedding requires a dowry that may strain even a wealthy family's resources, the amount determined by complex calculations of status and expectation. A son's gambling debts must be paid to avoid scandal, the sum sometimes shocking in its size, representing nights of careless betting and unlucky cards. Legal fees accumulate when disputes arise over boundaries or inheritances, or the thousand other matters that bring wealthy families into conflict with each other and with the law. Debt is both shameful and universal, spoken of in whispers and euphemisms but acknowledged by all as an inevitable part of life among the wealthy. The truly rich carry debt as easily as they carry their names, secure in the knowledge that their assets far exceed their liabilities, that creditors will wait because the estate or the family fortune guarantees eventual payment. Others live in a more precarious position, maintaining appearances through increasingly desperate borrowing, robbing one creditor to pay another, always one bad harvest or one unlucky investment away from ruin. The threat of ruin hangs over even prosperous families like a sword suspended by thread. Fortunes can vanish with startling speed, erased by bad decisions or bad luck or the simple accumulation of expenses that grow faster than income. When a family falls, it falls publicly and completely, the house sold to satisfy debts, the possessions auctioned off to strangers, the family name tarnished by association with bankruptcy. Those who remain in society after such a fall do so only through the charity of relatives, or the fortunate marriage that brings new money to replace what was lost. Marriage itself is the great financial transaction of Regency life, the mechanism by which wealth moves between families and fortunes are rebuilt or established. A daughter represents both an expense and an asset, requiring substantial investment in her education and presentation, but offering in return the possibility of an advantageous match that brings new connections and new resources. The marriage market is discussed in exactly those terms: young women evaluated for their attractions and their dowries, young men assessed for their prospects and their willingness to take on the burden of a wife and eventually children. The negotiations surrounding a marriage can take months, lawyers and family representatives haggling over settlements and jointures. Every contingency must be considered and provided for. What happens if the husband dies first? What happens if the wife dies in childbirth? What happens if there are no heirs or only daughters or sons who prove unsuitable? The documents produced by these negotiations run to dozens of pages, written in language so dense and technical. Once married, a woman's legal existence largely disappears, absorbed into her husband's identity. Her property becomes his property, her debts his debts, her earnings, if she has any, his to control. This legal fiction of marital unity, the doctrine that husband and wife are one person, and that person is the husband, shapes every aspect of married life among the wealthy. A wife may manage the household, direct the servants, organize entertainments, but she does so with money that is not legally hers, making decisions that her husband could overrule at any moment. Some marriages are happy despite, or perhaps because of the financial calculations that brought them into being. Affection can grow where it did not exist at first. Respect can develop between partners who entered the union as strangers. Other marriages are exercises in mutual tolerance, or open warfare, couples bound by law and social expectation, but separated by everything else that might make a life together bearable. The unhappily married have few options, divorce being nearly impossible, and so scandalous that even those who could obtain one rarely attempt it. Children arrive in these marriages with a regularity that suggests limited understanding of or ability to control conception. Large families are common, 8 or 10 children not unusual, each birth bringing its own dangers for mother and child alike. The wealthy can afford doctors and midwives, clean linens, and separate rooms for lying in. but they cannot escape the fundamental perils of childbirth in an age before antibiotics or safe surgical intervention. Women die bringing life into the world at the mortality rate high enough that every pregnancy is a gamble, every safe delivery a cause for genuine relief. The children who survive face their own challenges, growing up in households where they are often more familiar with servants than with their own parents. The wealthy do not raise their children so much as oversee their raising, delegating the actual work to nurses and governesses, tutors and schools. A mother may see her children for an hour in the afternoon, dressed in their best clothes, on their best behavior. A father may be even more distant, a figure encountered mainly at meal times or on formal occasions, a source of discipline and judgment, more than comfort or affection. The nursery exists in its own world, a realm ruled by the nurse who feeds and bathes and dresses the youngest children, who soothes their hurts and wipes their tears, who teaches them their first words and watches their first step. She is often the most important person in a young child's life, more present and more attentive than parents who have other concerns and obligations. The attachment children form to their nurses can last a lifetime, though it is tinged with the awareness that the nurse is a servant, paid to provide care, replaceable if she displeases, or if the family's circumstances change. As children grow older, the boys and girls diverge onto separate paths that will determine the rest of their lives. Boys are educated for the world, sent away to school where they will learn Latin and Greek, mathematics and history, the subjects deemed necessary for men who will manage estates and participate. The schools are brutal places by modern standards, cold and uncomfortable, discipline maintained through beatings and humiliation, but they are also where boys form the friendships and connections that will serve them throughout their lives. Girls are educated for the drawing room and the marriage market, taught skills that will make them agreeable companions and competent household managers. They learn to read and write, to do simple arithmetic, to speak a little French and perhaps Italian. They learn to play the pianoforte well enough to entertain guests, to sketch and paint in watercolors, to do fine needlework. Most importantly, they learn deportment, how to move gracefully, how to enter and exit rooms, how to sit and stand, how to manage the elaborate costumes they will wear once they are old enough to enter society. The transition to adulthood brings new freedoms and new constraints for both sexes. A young man of the wealthy class gains access to his inheritance or at least to income from family trusts, allowing him to establish his own household, to travel, to gamble and drink and pursue the pleasures available to those with money and time. He is expected to sow wild oats, to have adventures and even scandals, as long as he is discreet and eventually settles down to the serious business of marriage and heirs. A young woman's entry into society is more carefully choreographed, her debut marking the beginning of her availability for marriage. As she is presented at court if her family has the necessary connections, dressed in white with feathers in her hair, taught to curtsy low before royalty without losing her balance or her composure. She attends balls and assemblies, always chaperoned, always watched, her reputation fragile as glass and just as easily shattered by a careless moment or a malicious rumor. The marriage season follows a predictable rhythm, families with daughters to marry descending on London in the spring, filling rented houses in the fashionable neighborhoods, attending the same round of events in hopes of making the right connections. The competition is fierce, too many young women chasing too few suitable young men. The definition of suitable narrowing as the season progresses and the most desirable matches are claimed by those with the best combinations of beauty, fortune, and family connection. Those who fail to find husbands in their first season try again the next year, though with each passing season their position grows more precarious, their value in the marriage market declining as they age past the ideal. By the time a woman reaches her mid-20s without marrying, she is considered on the shelf, her prospects dimming to the point where she may accept a match she would have rejected a few years earlier. Some never marry at all, becoming the maiden aunts who live with relatives, useful for chaperoning younger women and managing households, but never quite achieving the status that comes with being a wife. The social world of the Regency wealthy is small and ingrown, with the same families encountering each other repeatedly in London during the season and in the countryside the rest of the year. Everyone knows everyone else, or at least knows of them, reputations preceding individuals, stories and scandals circulating through networks of gossip that operate faster than any official communication. Privacy in such a world is nearly impossible, Every action observed and interpreted, every choice dissected for meaning and motive. The entertainments available to the wealthy are surprisingly limited despite their resources. There are balls and assemblies, card parties and musicals, dinners that stretch for hours and theatrical performances that may be amateur or professional depending on the occasion. There is hunting and shooting for the men, elaborate expeditions that take them away from the house for days at a time, pursuing game across countryside that exists largely for this purpose. There is riding and driving, the display of horsemanship, a form of social competition as serious as any other. Books provide escape for some, though reading too much is considered faintly suspect, particularly for women who might fill their heads with inappropriate ideas from novels. The libraries in wealthy homes contain impressive collections, volumes bound in leather and stamped with gold, arranged on shelves that reach toward high ceilings. Some of these books have never been opened, purchased by the shelf rather than the volume, decorative objects that signal education and refinement, whether or not anyone actually reads them. Music is both entertainment and accomplishment. Young women expected to play and sing with enough skill to please without outshining their guests. The pianoforte occupies a prominent place in the drawing room, its polished wood and ivory keys objects of beauty even when silent. On evenings when the family gathers, someone will be pressed to play, producing melodies that may be skillfully executed or painfully amateur, depending on talent and the quality of instruction received. Art is collected and displayed, paintings of ancestors and landscapes filling walls in public rooms, demonstrating taste and wealth in equal measure. Some wealthy families commission their own portraits, sitting for artists who will flatter and idealize, creating images that will hang in these halls long after the subjects have died, becoming themselves ancestors to be wondered at by future generations. The portraits gaze down on the living with expressions that seem knowing or melancholy or simply vacant, frozen in moments that represent their subjects at their finest or at least at their most formally arranged. The passage of time in this world is marked not by productive achievement but by social milestones and seasonal rituals. The calendar revolves around the London season with its compressed schedule of activity, the migrations to and from country estates, the holidays that bring extended families together, whether they wish to be together or not. Christmas is a time of obligation disguised as celebration. Houses filled with relatives who must be fed and housed and entertained. Gifts exchanged according to complex calculations of status and affection. Religion weaves through this world without quite dominating it. Church attendance a social requirement more than spiritual practice. The wealthy have their own pews in the parish church, box pews with cushions and sometimes fireplaces, spaces that separate them from the common worshippers even in the house of God. Services are endured rather than embraced. The sermons often aimed at encouraging the poor to accept their lot rather than challenging the rich to examine theirs. The clergy themselves occupy an ambiguous position in this society, respected for their office but often not particularly well compensated unless they have private means or have secured a good living through family connection. Younger sons of wealthy families sometimes enter the church as a respectable profession that does not require them to work in any common sense. Their parishes managed by curates while they live lives not obviously different from their secular brothers. Death, when it comes to the wealthy, is orchestrated as carefully as every other life event. Bodies are laid out in state in the best rooms, dressed in finest clothes, surrounded by candles and flowers that cannot quite mask the smell of mortality. Funerals are grand affairs, the size and expense of the funeral procession reflecting the importance of the deceased. Black becomes the required color for mourning, strict rules dictating how long different relatives must wear it, when they can transition to half-mourning grays and purples, when they can finally return to normal colors and normal life. Widows face particularly rigid mourning requirements, expected to withdraw from society for a full year, to wear only black, to avoid entertainment and pleasure. The mourning costume itself is distinctive, heavy crepe veils that hide the face, dresses trimmed with yet more crepe that rustles with every movement. A widow in deep mourning is a figure of pathos and sometimes of considerable power, especially if her husband left her well provided for and she has no interest in remarrying. Inheritance follows strict patterns determined by law and custom, the eldest son receiving the bulk of the estate through the system of primogeniture that keeps properties intact rather than divided among multiple heirs. Younger sons must make their own way in the world, either through professions or through advantageous marriages or through the generosity of the brother who inherited. Daughters receive dowries if the family can afford them, but no claim on the land or the title that may go with it. The entail is a particular source of family tension, a legal arrangement that binds property through generations, preventing its sale or division, ensuring it passes intact to the next male heir, even if that heir is a distant cousin barely known to the family. Entails protect estates from being broken up or sold to pay debts, but they also create situations where the current occupant of a house has limited control over the property he lives in, unable to sell or even mortgage it without complex legal procedures. That they come forms because the law itself is a maze of precedent and procedure, designed by and for the wealthy, protecting their property rights, while offering little to those without resources. Justice for the rich means access to lawyers who can navigate this maze, who can find the loopholes and precedents that serve their clients' interests. Justice for the poor means the threat of harsh punishment for minor crimes, transportation to Australia for stealing bread, hanging for poaching game on land that might once have fed the whole community before it was enclosed and claimed for private use. The political world of Regency England is entirely the domain of the wealthy. Voting rights restricted to property owners, seats in Parliament often controlled by a handful of families who treat them as inherited possessions. The great estates are political units as well as economic ones, their owners expected to influence how their tenants and dependents vote when elections occur. The system is corrupt by modern standards. Bribery and intimidation accepted parts of the electoral process, but it is the system everyone knows and few seriously challenge. Reform movements exist on the margins, voices calling for expansion of voting rights, for representation of the new industrial cities, for changes to a system that concentrates power in hands of fewer and fewer as land consolidates and wealth accumulates. These voices are largely ignored by the comfortable wealthy who see no reason to share power or to question arrangements that serve them so well. The occasional riot or protest is suppressed with military force, the wealthy convinced that order matters more than justice, that stability justifies almost any measure to maintain it. The Industrial Revolution is transforming England during this period. Factories rising in the north, cities swelling with workers drawn from countryside by promise of wages however low. The wealthy are aware of these changes but largely insulated from them. Their income still derived primarily from land rather than industry. Their lives still centered on estates that seem timeless even as the world around them changes with accelerating speed. Some invest in the new industries, diversifying their wealth, but most remain tied to land and the traditional sources of aristocratic income. The empire is expanding during these years, British power reaching across oceans, claiming territories, establishing colonies, building the networks of trade that will make Britain the dominant global power for the next century. The wealthy benefit from empire through investments in trading companies, through positions in colonial administration for younger sons, through the flood of exotic goods that arrive in British ports. Sugar and tea and cotton, spices and silk and porcelain, all flowing into Britain in exchange for manufactured goods and British governance. The moral cost of empire is rarely discussed in drawing rooms where sugar sweetens tea and cotton makes possible the fine muslins that fashion demands. Slavery, though abolished in Britain itself, continues in the colonies, producing the wealth that sustains the comfortable lives of those who need never think about where their sugar comes from or who grew it. The few voices raised against slavery and the slave trade are considered radical, their concerns dismissed by those who benefit from the system and see no reason to question it. The world beyond Britain might as well not exist for many of the wealthy. Their knowledge of geography and foreign cultures, limited to what they learned in childhood lessons or picked up from books. Travel to the continent is possible for those with means and adventurous spirits. The Grand Tour, a traditional part of a young gentleman's education, but it is not common, especially during the years when war with France makes travel dangerous or impossible. Those who do travel return with stories and souvenirs, creating brief sensations in social circles. The French Revolution casts a long shadow over this period, a reminder that the social order can be overturned, that wealth and title offer no protection when populations rise in anger. The wealthy British watch events in France with horror and fascination, congratulating themselves on British stability while taking measures to ensure no similar uprising occurs at home. Radicalism is suppressed, meetings of reformers broken up, the mechanisms of state power deployed to maintain the hierarchy that serves the wealthy so well. War with France becomes the defining fact of the era. Years of conflict that drain treasuries and fill graveyards, that create heroes and widows in equal measure. The wealthy send their sons to serve as officers, purchasing commissions that allow young men with no military training to command soldiers in battles they barely understand. Some of these young officers die far from home, their names added to memorials in country churches, their families left to mourn and to take pride in sacrifice for king and country. The military itself reflects the social hierarchy, officers drawn from wealthy families, common soldiers from the poor who join for lack of better options. Conditions for the ordinary soldier are brutal, discipline maintained through flogging and other punishments, pay barely sufficient to survive, glory reserved for the officers who lead while the common men do the fighting and dying. Yet the army offers opportunity for those with courage and luck, the possibility of rising through ranks, of gaining pension and respect, of escaping the grinding poverty that is the alternative. The Navy is equally divided along class lines, officers from wealthy families learning seamanship on ships where they command men who have been pressed into service against their will. Life at sea is hard for everyone, but hardest for the common sailors who live in crowded conditions below decks, whose diet of salt pork and hardtack leads to scurvy and other diseases, who face death from battle or storm or simple accident with a resignation born of having no choice. Naval officers can make fortunes through prize money when they capture enemy ships, the wealth divided according to rank, the captain and admirals receiving the largest shares while common sailors receive amounts that barely register. Through all these wider world events, life on the great estates continues with remarkable consistency, as if history happens elsewhere and to other people. The wars may disrupt trade or take away sons, but the basic rhythms of wealthy life persist. Breakfast is served at the same hour whether Britain is at war or peace. The gardens are tended regardless of political upheaval. The social season continues, balls and assemblies, and the endless round of visits and entertainments that fill time and demonstrate status. The servants who make this life possible remain largely invisible in the historical record, their names unrecorded, their stories lost. We know them primarily through the traces they leave in household accounts, wages paid, positions filled, the endless turnover as young people arrive seeking work and older ones depart for new positions or retirement, or simply because they can no longer meet the physical demands of service. A few servants stay with families for decades, becoming institutions themselves, their loyalty rewarded with small pensions, and the knowledge that they helped build and maintain something larger than themselves. The relationship between servants and served is complex and contradictory, built on dependence that flows in both directions. The wealthy depend on servants for everything from dressing themselves to managing their households, yet they maintain elaborate fictions about the separateness of their spheres, the superiority of their positions. Servants depend on the wealthy for employment and the security it provides, yet they maintain their own hierarchies and judgments, their own standards of what constitutes proper behavior from those they serve. In the servants' hall, a parallel society exists with its own rules and relationships, its own gossip and drama. The upper servants, butler and housekeeper, cook and lady's maid, maintain distance from the lower staff, eating separately, occupying better rooms, earning wages that allow them to save and perhaps eventually establish themselves independently. The lower servants, scullery maids and boot boys, stable hands and general labourers, do the hardest work for the least pay, their prospects of rising limited, their lives consumed by labour that leaves them exhausted and aging before their time. Yet there is satisfaction in service for those who take pride in their work, who find meaning in keeping a great house running smoothly, who develop skills that make them valuable and sought after. A good cook can command impressive wages, moving between houses, building reputation that allows her to choose her positions. A skilled valet or lady's maid becomes indispensable to their employer, developing relationships that can last lifetimes and bring benefits beyond wages. The great estates themselves are communities, small worlds containing everything necessary for survival and comfort. There are farms and dairies, gardens and orchards, workshops where craftsmen make and repair the tools and goods the estate requires. There are mills and breweries, bakeries and smokehouses, each operation managed by someone with specific skills and knowledge passed down through generations or learned through apprenticeship. The estate aims for self-sufficiency, producing as much as possible of what it needs, buying from outside only what cannot be made or grown locally. This self-sufficiency makes estates resistant to change, little reason to alter systems that have worked for centuries, that provide employment for local people, that maintain traditional relationships between landowner and tenant, master and servant. The Industrial Revolution's factory system has little appeal to those who benefit from the old ways, who see in the new cities and their mills only ugliness and disruption, who prefer the familiar hierarchies of rural life to the uncertain democracy of wage labor. Time itself seems to move differently on these estates, slower, more cyclical, tied to seasons and harvests rather than clocks and schedules. The same tasks are performed at the same times year after year, planting and harvesting, shearing sheep and cutting hay, making preserves and storing root vegetables. There is comfort in this repetition for those who value stability, who find security in knowing what tomorrow will bring, because it will bring what yesterday brought and the day before that. But beneath this surface stability, change is constant and inevitable, the world transforming in ways that will make the Regency estate as obsolete as the feudal manor it replaced. The railroad is coming, connecting cities and shrinking distances, making possible new forms of commerce and new patterns of life. The telegraph will follow, collapsing time, allowing communication across distances that once took days or weeks to traverse. The industrial cities continue to grow, drawing population away from countryside, creating new forms of wealth that have nothing to do with land or inheritance. The wealthy of the Regency era cannot see this future clearly, though some sense that the world they know is temporary, that their children or grandchildren will live in a different England. Some resist change, defending old ways, arguing for the preservation of traditions and hierarchies. Others embrace elements of the new, investing in railroads and factories, adapting to changed circumstances while trying to maintain their privileged positions. Most simply continue living as they always have, assuming that wealth and status will protect them, that the future will accommodate itself to their needs and expectations rather than the reverse. In the end, the Regency wealthy occupy a moment of transition, living in a world that is already passing even as they work to preserve it. The great houses still stand, many of them, though most are now owned by the National Trust or converted to hotels or schools. The families that built them have largely disappeared or diminished, their wealth dispersed, their titles passed to distant cousins or extinct entirely. What remains is the physical evidence of their lives, the buildings and portraits, the furniture and silver, the carefully maintained gardens that still bloom in patterns designed centuries ago. And what remains too is the record they left in letters and diaries, in account books and legal documents, in the novels written by those who observed them closely, by Jane Austen and others who saw both the comedy and the pathos of their world. These records reveal people no better or worse than any others, struggling with the same fundamental questions of meaning and purpose, seeking happiness in lives constrained by expectation and obligations, of finding pleasure where they could and enduring disappointment with whatever grace they could summon. The distance between that world and ours is measured not just in years but in fundamental assumptions about how life should be lived, who has value, what constitutes success. Their world was built on inequality accepted as natural and inevitable, on hierarchies that placed people in fixed positions determined by birth rather than merit. Ours aspires, however imperfectly, to something more egalitarian, more fair, more open to possibility. Yet we remain fascinated by their world, drawn to stories of balls and courtship, of great houses and complex manners, perhaps because there is something seductive about certainty, something appealing about a world where everyone knew their place even if that place was confining. As you drift toward sleep tonight, the world of Regency wealth fades back into history where it belongs. A collection of images and impressions, stories and scenes. The morning wash in cold water, the elaborate dressing rituals, the formal breakfasts and endless social calls, the beautiful prisons of corset and cravat, the performances of grace and ease that required constant effort. The wealth that brought every material comfort but could not buy freedom or happiness or escape from the fundamental loneliness of lives lived always on display. The fires burn down in their grates one final time. The candles gutter and go out. The great houses settle into darkness, and from this distance, from our time looking back at theirs, we can see both what they had and what they lacked. the privilege and the price, the beauty and the burden. We can appreciate their world without wishing to live in it, can learn from their mistakes without repeating them, can take from their example whatever still speaks to our condition while leaving behind what belongs only to their vanished age. The night deepens. The house falls silent. Sleep claims everyone at last, dreams carrying them beyond the constraints of waking life into spaces where different rules apply, where the performance can finally end and the self beneath the costume can breathe free. And in those dreams, perhaps, there is a kind of freedom that wealth could never purchase, a release that no amount of silk or silver could provide, rest that comes not from luxury, is surrendering the exhausting effort of maintaining appearance and accepting, just for these hours of darkness, the simple animal comfort of warmth and safety and unconsciousness. Tomorrow will come with its demands and rituals, its requirements and performances. But that is tomorrow, and tonight is tonight, and in this moment between waking and sleep, in this liminal space where the past becomes present and the present fades toward dreams, all the elaborate constructions of wealth and status dissolve into something simpler, more fundamental, more true. We are all just human in the end, rich and poor alike, all seeking the same basic things beneath our different costumes, all making our way through time as best we can, all heading toward the same destination regardless of how we travel there. So rest now in your comfortable bed, grateful for warmth without the labor of fire tending, for cleanliness without cold water and coarse soap, for the freedom to wake tomorrow and choose your own path rather than following tracks laid down by ancestors you never knew. The Regency wealthy had much that we lack, but we have much that they could never imagine, and perhaps the balance is not so bad after all. Good night. Sleep well. The morning that follows is much like the morning that came before, and the one before that, stretching back through weeks and months and years until the pattern itself becomes a kind of prison built from routine. The wealthy of Regency England live in cycles that repeat with such regularity that time seems almost to stand still, each day a variation on a theme so familiar that deviation feels impossible even when it might be desired. The sameness is both comfort and curse, providing the security of predictability while draining life of the possibility of genuine surprise or transformation. The breakfast table fills again with the same faces arranged in the same configuration, eating from the same plates, discussing topics that differ only in small details from yesterday's conversations. The weather has changed or it has not changed, both states equally worthy of extended commentary. Some recent letter has arrived or it has not arrived, and if it has, its contents will be parsed and analyzed with an intensity that far exceeds their actual importance. Someone's health is discussed, symptoms described with a fascination that borders on obsessive, remedies proposed and debated, as if the outcome truly mattered, when in fact it rarely does. The physicians who attend the wealthy bring with them an air of authority built on foundations of sand. Their theories of health and disease a mixture of ancient wisdom, recent speculation. The humors must be balanced, they declare, as if the body were a ledger requiring careful accounting. Too much blood leads to fever and agitation, the solution being to remove some through bleeding that leaves patients pale and weak, but supposedly healthier. Too much bile, black or yellow, requires purging through substances that empty the bowels with violent efficiency, leaving sufferers exhausted and dehydrated, but convinced they have been cleansed. The medicine chest in a wealthy home contains preparations that range from harmless to actively dangerous, few of them actually effective for their stated purposes. There are tonics and elixirs, powders and pills, each promising relief from some ailment or another. Landowner is prescribed freely for everything from headaches to heartbreak, its opiate contents providing genuine relief at the cost of dependency that physicians either do not recognize or choose to ignore. Mercury is used to treat syphilis and other conditions, slowly poisoning patients even as it supposedly cures them. The symptoms of mercury poisoning often mistaken for the progression of the original disease. Women suffer particularly under medical theories that regard their bodies as inherently defective, prone to mysterious feminine ailments that require constant monitoring and intervention. Hysteria, that catch-all diagnosis, is blamed for everything from fainting to frustration, the solution often being rest so complete that it borders on imprisonment. Women are confined to bed for weeks or months, forbidden from reading or writing or engaging in any activity that might overtax their delicate constitutions, the enforced idleness often making them genuinely ill in ways they were not before. Childbirth remains the most dangerous thing a wealthy woman will likely experience. Despite access to doctors and midwives, clean linens and comfortable rooms, the process itself has not changed since humanity began, and medical intervention often makes things worse rather than better. Doctors bring their unwashed hands and their instruments from other patients, spreading infections that kill women in their lying-in chambers. The puerperal fever that sweeps through maternity wards, a mystery that will not be solved for decades yet to come. The children born into these households face their own medical hazards, their survival far from assured despite wealth and attention. Infant mortality takes rich and poor alike, disease and accident, and simple bad luck, claiming babies before they have lived long enough to be named or baptized. But the parents who lose children are expected to bear their grief with fortitude, to accept death as God's will, to try again in hopes that the next child will survive where others did not. Some families bury multiple children. The small graves in the family plot a reminder that money cannot purchase immunity from mortality. Those children who survive past infancy face a gauntlet of childhood diseases that sweep through households with democratic impartiality. Measles and mumps, whooping cough and scarlet fever, each claiming some victims while sparing others according to no pattern anyone can discern. Smallpox is perhaps the most feared, leaving survivors pockmarked and sometimes blind. The scars permanent reminders of brush with death. Inoculation is available, the practice of deliberately infecting someone with a mild case of smallpox to prevent a severe one, but it is controversial and dangerous, sometimes causing the very disease it is meant to prevent. The dental care available to the wealthy is primitive and painful, little better than what is available to anyone else, and in some ways worse because the fashionable sweet diet rots teeth faster than the plain fare of working people. Toothaches are common and agonizing, the only real solution being extraction performed without anesthetic beyond perhaps some brandy or laudanum. The tools used look like instruments of torture, pliers and levers designed to grip and pull, the procedure often breaking teeth that must then be dug out piece by piece from bleeding gums. False teeth are available for those who can afford them, made from ivory, or bone, or teeth pulled from corpses, mounted on plates of gold or silver that sit uncomfortably in the mouth, and must be removed for eating. The wealthy sometimes commission entire sets of false teeth, vanity overcoming the discomfort and expense. The results often more grotesque than the gaps they are meant to fill. Some teeth are taken from living donors, poor people willing to sell their healthy teeth for money that seems substantial, until the permanent loss is considered. The elderly among the wealthy face decline with whatever dignity they can maintain, their bodies failing in ways that medicine can observe but not prevent or cure. Joints stiffen with what is called rheumatism, the pain managed with willow bark tea or laudanum, or simply endured. Vision fails, spectacles helping some but unavailable in the precise prescriptions that would actually correct the problem. Hearing diminishes, forcing conversations to be shouted, or conducted through ear trumpets that amplify sound imperfectly. Memory fades, names and faces slipping away, recent events forgotten while childhood memories remain vivid and sharp. Death itself, when it comes, is often preceded by days or weeks of final illness. The dying person confined to bed, attended by family and servants, visited by clergy who offer spiritual comfort, if not physical relief. The deathbed scene is a set piece of its own. The dying person expected to deliver final words of wisdom or warning, to forgive old grudges and express love for those gathered around. The reality is often less dramatic. Death coming in morphine-hazed confusion or sudden silence. The theatrical deathbed speech more common in novels than in actual sick rooms. The body once the spirit has departed becomes a problem requiring immediate attention, especially in warm weather when decay begins quickly. The corpse is washed and dressed in grave clothes, often by servants who perform this final service, with a mixture of duty and superstition. The room is prepared for viewing, mirrors covered or turned to the wall according to old beliefs about souls and reflections, windows open to release the spirit, clocks stopped at the moment of death. The wealthy can afford to keep the body at home for several days before burial, ice packed around the coffin to slow decomposition, though the smell of death still seeps through perfume and flowers. Funerals for the wealthy are elaborate productions requiring extensive planning and significant expense. The coffin itself is a work of craftsmanship, wood polished and lined with satin, handles of brass or silver, nameplate engraved with the deceased's details. The funeral procession includes hired mutes, professional mourners dressed in black who walk slowly ahead of the hearse, lending gravity to the occasion. Carriages follow their occupants ranked by relationship and importance, everyone dressed in mourning clothes that represent substantial investment in fabric and tailoring. The burial takes place in the family plot, a section of the churchyard reserved through ancient right or recent purchase, the grave dug to receive this newest occupant. The service follows prescribed forms, words spoken that have been spoken at countless funerals, promises of resurrection and eternal life offered to those who remain as much as to the one who has departed. Earth is scattered on the coffin, the sound of dirt hitting wood, a finality that brings tears even to those who thought they had finished weeping. Mourning continues long after the burial, especially for widows who are expected to withdraw from society and normal life for periods measured in years rather than months. The mourning costume is expensive and uncomfortable, heavy black fabric that absorbs heat in summer and retains cold in winter, crepe trim that rustles with every movement like dried leaves. Jewelry is limited to jet or black enamel, even wedding rings sometimes replaced by black versions. The house itself goes into mourning, curtains drawn, social gatherings suspended, everything subdued and somber until the appropriate period has passed. The dead are commemorated through monuments ranging from simple headstones to elaborate memorials, the wealthy commissioning sculptures and inscriptions that attempt to capture something of the person who has gone. Family vaults hold multiple generations, coffins stacked and shelved like books in a library of the dead. The living visit occasionally, bringing flowers or simply standing in remembrance, reading names and dates that mark lives now reduced to these bare facts carved in stone. The estate passes to the next generation through mechanisms established long before, the will merely confirming what law and custom already dictate. The heir takes possession not just of property but of obligation, the expectation that he will maintain what his ancestors built, increase it if possible, and pass it intact to his own heir in turn. The weight of this inheritance can be crushing, especially for someone who never asked for it, who might have preferred a different life but who has no choice except to accept what birth has determined. The household adjusts to new ownership, as it has adjusted countless times before, servants who served the father now serving the son, routines continuing with minimal disruption. The new master may make changes, small assertions of authority that distinguish his tenure from his predecessors, but the fundamental patterns persist. The same rooms are used for the same purposes, the same meals served at the same times, the same social obligations observed with the same careful attention to propriety. The women of the household face their own transitions, positions shifting as one generation succeeds another. The widow becomes the dowager, moving from the best rooms to smaller quarters, her authority diminished though her presence remains. The new wife becomes mistress of the house, taking control of keys and household management, learning to navigate relationships with servants who remember her as a girl and may not easily accept her new authority. Daughters who have not married become aunts, their status ambiguous, neither quite family nor quite guests, useful for helping with children and household tasks but sometimes resented for their continued presence. The great house itself shows the accumulation of generations in its furnishings and decoration, layers of taste and fashion preserved like geological strata. The furniture in some rooms dates back a century or more, heavy oak pieces that have survived because they were built to last and because no one has bothered to replace them. Other rooms reflect more recent styles, delicate furniture in fashionable woods, upholstery in current colors and patterns, everything coordinated to create an effect of modern elegance. Still other rooms exist in states of benign neglect, unchanged for decades, filled with possessions no one uses but no one can quite bring themselves to discard. The attics hold the overflow, trunks full of old clothes and linens, furniture too damaged or outdated to display but too good to destroy, toys from childhoods, long past extra beards walked solamtals, books and papers, and mysterious objects whose origins no one living can quite recall. Servants rummage through these spaces looking for things that can be repurposed, finding treasure and trash mixed together in democratic confusion. The attics tell the real history of the family, not the official version presented in portraits and monuments, but the messy accumulation of lives actually lived. The cellars below hold their own treasures, wine laid down decades ago now reaching maturity, ports and clarets, bottles covered in dust and cobwebs, their labels faded but their contents supposedly improving with age. The wine cellar is the butler's domain, his knowledge of its contents encyclopedic, his judgment about when to open specific bottles treated as serious expertise. He maintains records of what is drunk and what remains, noting special occasions in his neat handwriting, creating an alcoholic chronicle of family history. Food storage occupies other cellar spaces, cool rooms where perishables last longer than they would above ground. Hanging from hooks are hams and game birds, aging until they reach the state of decomposition that wealthy palates prefer, what they call gamey others might simply call spoiled. Stone shelves hold cheeses ripening slowly, developing the molds and bacteria that transform milk into something entirely different. Vegetables are buried in sand or stored in bins, potatoes and carrots, and turnips that will feed the household through winter when fresh produce is scarce. The still room, neither quite cellar nor quite kitchen, is where preserving happens, where the abundance of summer is transformed into jams and jellies, pickles and conserves that will provide sweetness and flavor during the lean months. The work is hot and sticky, fruit boiling in copper pots, sugar measured carefully, jars sealed with wax to keep out air and spoilage. The women who work here, usually under the housekeeper's supervision, take pride in their creations, competing informally to produce the clearest jellies, the most perfectly set preserves. The dairy is another specialized space, cool and scrupulously clean, where milk from the estate's cows is transformed into butter and cream, cheese and yogurt. The dairy maid rises before dawn to begin her work, skimming cream, churning butter, washing equipment in water so hot it reddens her hands. The butter she produces is stamped with a wooden mold bearing the family crest, even this humble product marked as belonging to the estate. The cheese requires more time and skill, milk cultured and pressed and aged, the results sometimes excellent and sometimes mysteriously spoiled despite following the same procedures that worked last time. The brewery and bakehouse complete the estate's food production facilities, making beer and bread in quantities sufficient for household and servants alike. The beer is weak by modern standards but safer than water from wells that may be contaminated, everyone from children to elderly drinking it throughout the day. The bread comes fresh from the ovens daily, white flour for the family, brown for the servants, the distinction in grain quality another marker of hierarchy. The smell of baking fills the air on bread days, one of the few truly pleasant scents in a world where most smells speak of decay or bodily functions. The laundry is perhaps the most labor-intensive operation on the estate, the work of washing and drying and ironing the household's clothes and linens requiring several servants working full days. Copper boilers heat water to temperatures that send steam billowing through the laundry room, the women who work there red-faced and sweating regardless of season. Lye soap is harsh on fabrics and hands alike, scrubbing boards wear out elbows and knuckles, the labor so physically demanding that laundry maids are often young and rarely last more than a few years before moving to different positions or leaving service entirely. Ironing is skilled work, requiring judgment and experience, different fabrics needing different temperatures and techniques. The heavy irons are heated on the stove, their metal handles wrapped in cloth to protect hands from burning, the work requiring strength as well as finesse. A careless moment can scorch delicate fabric beyond repair, a disaster that might cost the laundry maid her position. The finest linens and most elaborate gowns are ironed with painstaking care, every ruffle smoothed, every pleat pressed sharp, the results presented upstairs with pride in work well done. The estate grounds require their own army of workers, gardeners and groundskeepers, each with specialized knowledge and responsibilities. The head gardener is a professional who has studied his craft, who understands soil and climate, propagation and pruning, who can coax blooms from reluctant plants and diagnose diseases from subtle symptoms. Under him work journeymen and apprentices, young men learning the trade, hoping someday to achieve head gardener positions of their own. The kitchen garden is productive rather than decorative, rows of vegetables and herbs arranged for efficiency rather than beauty. Here grow the potatoes and cabbages, onions and carrots that form the basis of most meals. The herbs include both culinary and medicinal varieties, sage and thyme for cooking, feverfew and chamomile for treating illness. The gardeners who work here know the rhythms of planting and harvest, when to sow and when to reap, how to rotate crops to maintain soil fertility. The hothouses are marvels of technology and expense, glass structures heated by systems of pipes and flues, creating tropical environments where exotic plants can grow in English climate. Here are cultivated pineapples and oranges, grapes and peaches, fruits so expensive and rare that their presence on the dinner table is a statement of wealth more than a source of nutrition. The hothouse gardener tends his charges with obsessive care, regulating temperature and moisture, hand-pollinating flowers, nurturing plants that would die within hours if exposed to outdoor conditions. The ornamental gardens receive most attention and admiration, their design following fashions that shift over decades. Earlier generations favored formal layouts, geometric precision, nature disciplined into patterns that please the eye through symmetry and order. More recent taste runs toward the picturesque, gardens designed to look natural, even though every element is carefully placed. Paths that curve as if by accident, plantings arranged to seem spontaneous. The reality is that these natural-looking gardens require more maintenance than formal ones, constant work to maintain the illusion of effortlessness. Water features add movement and sound to the garden, artificial streams and ponds fed by hidden pipes, cascades falling over rocks arranged to look as if nature placed them. Swans glide across ponds, their beauty admired even as their aggressive temperaments make them dangerous to approach. Fish swim in deeper pools, carp grown large on bread thrown by visitors, their presence another sign of the estate's completeness, its ability to support life in all forms. The ha-ha, that invisible fence consisting of a ditch and wall that keeps livestock from the ornamental grounds without obstructing views, is a particularly prized feature. From the house the landscape appears unbroken, lawns rolling away to merge with pastures beyond, the separation invisible until you walk close enough to discover the edge. Tsihaha represents the estate owner's power over landscape, his ability to reshape terrain to serve aesthetic purposes while maintaining practical boundaries. The park beyond the gardens is landscaped on a grander scale, individual trees positioned to create pleasing compositions, stands of woodland preserved or planted to frame views, the entire estate conceived as a work of art with nature as the medium. The park serves practical purposes as well, providing timber and firewood, grazing for deer kept for hunting, spaces for the extended walks that are essential to fashionable health and courtship. The paths through the park are maintained like the garden paths, gravel raked smooth, obstacles removed, the experience of walking designed to be pleasant rather than challenging. Follies dot the landscape, architectural oddities built purely for decoration, serving no function beyond providing destinations for walks and subjects for sketches. There are artificial ruins, brand new structures made to look ancient, complete with carefully placed ivy and strategically crumbled corners. There are temples to various gods and goddesses, classical forms recreated in miniature, their interiors furnished with benches where walkers can rest and contemplate views carefully composed to be visible through the temple's columns. There are grottos, caves, either natural or artificial, decorated with shells and minerals, dark, cool retreats on hot days. The stables represent another significant investment, buildings often more carefully designed and better maintained than the cottages where estate workers live. Buck stalls house valuable horses, each animal with its own space, the floors covered with fresh straw daily, the walls whitewashed to maintain cleanliness and discourage pests. Tack rooms hold saddles and bridles polished to gleaming perfection, each piece of equipment maintained in ready condition. The smell of horses and leather, hay and manure, creates an atmosphere that some find unpleasant, but others, particularly country gentlemen, find deeply satisfying. The carriage house shelters the vehicles that transport the family, from light gigs for short trips to heavy coaches for traveling with luggage and servants. Each carriage requires maintenance, wheels greased and checked for damage, leather upholstery cleaned and conditioned, paint touched up to maintain the gleaming finish that speaks of wealth and care. The family crest appears on the carriage doors, announcing the occupant's identity to everyone they pass, ensuring that social obligations are observed, debts acknowledged, respect paid. The kennels house hunting dogs, breeds selected and bred for specific purposes, pointers and setters, foxhounds and beagles, each with their role in the various hunts the estate hosts or participates in. The dogs are working animals despite their sometimes substantial value, trained to specific tasks, judged by their performance rather than their appearance. The kennel master knows each dog's lineage and personality, which bitches produce the best pups, which dogs are reliable and which occasionally unreliable, the accumulated knowledge of years spent breeding and training. The dovecote provides squab for the table, young pigeons harvested before they can fly, their flesh tender and mild. The structure itself is often architectural, a round tower with nesting boxes lining the interior walls, a ladder on a pivot allowing access to collect eggs and birds. The cooing of doves is considered a pleasant sound, unlike the harsh cawing of crows or the persistent bleating of sheep. The ice house is a practical necessity, a deep pit lined with brick or stone, packed in winter with ice cut from frozen ponds or purchased from commercial ice merchants. The ice packed with straw for insulation lasts well into summer, providing the means to preserve food and cool drinks, to make the ices and frozen desserts that are fashionable finale to elegant dinners. The icehouse is a luxury that demonstrates control over nature, the ability to have winter in summer, cold when the world is hot. The estate is designed to be self-sufficient, to produce everything needed for the family's comfort and the household's operation. This self-sufficiency is partly practical, reducing dependence on uncertain markets and unreliable suppliers, but it is also ideological, an expression of the belief that land ownership brings obligations as well as rights, that a proper gentleman manages his estate to benefit all who depend on it. The reality often falls short of the ideal, tenants squeezed for maximum rents, workers paid as little as market allows, but the ideal persists nonetheless, shaping expectations and justifying hierarchies. The relationship between landowner and tenant is complex and fraught, built on mutual dependence and mutual resentment. Tenants need the land they farm, having no other means of supporting themselves and their families, their skills and knowledge applicable only to agriculture. Landowners need tenants to work the land, the estates too vast to be farmed directly, the owners too elevated to labor with their hands. The rent contract binds them together in a relationship that can last generations, sons inheriting tenancies from fathers, continuity stretching back beyond memory. The good landlord, according to the era's understanding, balances profit and paternalism in extracting rents that keep the estate profitable while ensuring tenants can survive and prosper modestly. He maintains buildings in reasonable repair, provides assistance in years of crop failure, shows interest in his tenants' welfare without interfering in their independence. The reality is that few landlords achieve this balance consistently, economic pressures pushing them to demand higher rents, absenteeism making them ignorant of conditions on their own estates, the attractions of city life pulling them away from rural responsibilities. The bad landlord is a stock figure in the era's moral imagination. The rack renter who squeezes every possible shilling from his tenants, the absentee who never visits his estates and knows his tenants only as entries in account books. The school of modernizer who evicts long-standing tenants to make way for more profitable uses of land. These landlords are condemned in sermons and novels, held up as examples of what happens when property rights are exercised without corresponding duties, when profit becomes the only consideration. But even the good landlord operates within a system that fundamentally favors owners over tenants, that treats land as property rather than community resource, that gives all legal power to those who hold title. Tenants have no security beyond the terms of their leases, no right to remain if the landlord decides other uses are more profitable, no claim on improvements they make to the land they farm. Thus, the relationship is inherently unequal, balanced only by custom and mutual interest, either of which can be overcome when circumstances change. The enclosure movement that accelerates during this period transforms the English countryside, common lands that were once available for everyone's use, fenced and privatized, made the exclusive property of whoever can establish legal claim. The enclosures are justified as improvements, bringing scientific agriculture to land that was inefficiently used under the old communal systems, increasing productivity and therefore benefiting the nation as a whole. The cost falls on those who depended on common lands for survival, cottagers who grazed a few animals or gathered firewood, who lose access to resources that meant the difference between poverty and destitution. The human cost of enclosure is rarely calculated by those who profit from it. Displaced families disappearing from the countryside, migrating to cities or emigrating to colonies, their departure noted only as the reduction in surplus population. The landscape itself is transformed. Open fields replaced by a patchwork of hedged enclosures. The pattern of small enclosed fields that will define the English countryside for the next 2 centuries. The hedges provide habitat for birds and small animals, creating the rural landscape that will be celebrated as quintessentially English, though it is in fact recent creation born of legal and economic forces rather than natural development. The market economy penetrates more deeply into rural life during these years, subsistence farming giving way to production for sale, farmers specializing in crops or livestock that bring the best prices rather than growing what their families need. This commercialization brings prosperity to some, those with enough land and capital to invest in improvements, to weather bad years and exploit good ones. For others, it brings vulnerability, dependence on markets they do not control, prices that fluctuate unpredictably, the constant threat of ruin from forces beyond their understanding or influence. The farm buildings on a prosperous estate are substantial structures built to last, barns large enough to store hay and house animals through winter, granaries raised on staddle stones to keep rats from the stored grain, stables and workshops and storage sheds. These buildings represent capital investment, resources committed to productive purposes, the landowner's wealth made visible in brick and timber. The workers who use these buildings take pride in their maintenance, aware that good equipment and solid structures make their labor easier and more productive. The harvest is the climax of the agricultural year, the moment when all the year's labor is judged by what it has produced. The wealthy landowner may make ceremonial appearance during harvest walking through fields while the real work is done by laborers swinging scythes, women and children gathering and binding sheaves. The harvest supper is ancient tradition, the landowner providing feast for workers, beer flowing freely, temporary erasure of social distinctions as everyone celebrates successful harvest. The tradition is dying during this period, some landowners abandoning it as outdated paternalism, the relationships it expressed no longer matching economic reality. The threshing that follows harvest is brutal work, grain beaten from stalks using flails, the rhythmic pounding continuing for days or weeks depending on the size of the crop. Dust fills the air making breathing difficult, chaff works its way into clothes and hair, the labor so demanding that workers must be rotated to prevent exhaustion. Some estates invest in threshing machines, new technology that promises to reduce labor requirements, though these machines are often resented by workers who see them as threats to employment, and by traditionalists who reject mechanization on principle. The winnowing separates grain from chaff, tossing the mixture into the air on windy days or creating artificial wind with fans, the heavier grain falling straight down while lighter chaff is blown away. The grain is bagged and stored or sold, the chaff used for animal bedding or simply burned, the smoke rising from farms throughout the countryside. The straw is baled and stored, valuable as winter animal feed and bedding, as roofing material for cottages. The winter that follows harvest is slow time, less urgent work, days shortened by early darkness and cold that makes outdoor labor miserable. The estate workers shift to indoor tasks, repairing equipment, processing stored crops, maintaining buildings. The wealthy retreat indoors as well, the social season moving to London where houses are rented for months at a time, the country estate left to the care of skeleton staff until spring makes rural life appealing again. The London season is the great gathering of wealth and ambition, families coming to the city not just for entertainment, but for serious social business, marriages to be arranged, alliances to be formed, status to be established or confirmed. The rental market for fashionable houses is competitive and expensive, the best addresses commanding prices that strain even wealthy families' resources. These houses are furnished with care, staff brought from country estates supplemented by London servants familiar with city ways, everything arranged to impress visitors and provide proper setting for the family's social campaign. The season follows rigid schedule, everyone participating in the same round of events, mornings for shopping and calls, afternoons for riding in the park, or attending at-home hours, evenings for balls and assemblies, dinners and theatre. The schedule is exhausting, days blurring together an endless succession of social obligations, faces and names multiplying beyond anyone's ability to remember them all, conversations repeating the same topics with different participants. The goal is to see and be seen, to remain visible in the social consciousness, to avoid the death of being forgotten or worse being deliberately excluded. The marriage market operates most actively during the season, young women presented and evaluated, young men surveying the field, and being surveyed in turn, parents negotiating behind the scenes while their children dance and flirt under watchful chaperone eyes. The competition is fierce, many more daughters than desirable matches, fortunes won and lost in the space of a season as engagements are announced and disappointed families withdraw to lick their wounds. The successful matches are celebrated with enthusiasm, the failures endured with what grace can be mustered, everyone knowing there is always next season for those young enough to try again. The theatre provides entertainment and opportunity for display. The boxes where the wealthy sit are themselves stages where the audience watches each other as much as they watch the performance. The opera is particularly fashionable, though few in attendance actually follow the Italian, and many spend the performance talking or dozing, coming for the social opportunity rather than the music. The intervals are when the real action happens, visiting between boxes, promenading in hallways, arranging to meet at the next event on the endless social calendar. The clubs are exclusively male domains, spaces where gentlemen can escape domestic and social obligations, where they can gamble and drink, read newspapers and gossip without the constraints that govern mixed company. The most fashionable clubs are difficult to join, requiring sponsors and facing rejection that carries social stigma. Inside the clubs, men sit in deep leather chairs, smoke cigars, conduct business in low voices, occasionally nod off in corner with newspapers on their laps. The clubs are refuges and prisons both, places where men can be themselves among equals, except that they are never truly among equals. The hierarchies of wealth and birth and achievement following them even here. The coffee houses offer similar function at lower price point, accessible to broader range of people including professionals and merchants. Here news is exchanged and business conducted, deals made over cups of bitter coffee, reputations built or destroyed through conversations that flow from table to table. The coffee house is democratic space by the standards of the era, though still excluding women and the poorest classes, a space where a man is judged more by his wit and information than by his birth, where the younger son of a baron might sit at the same table as a successful attorney or physician. The parks provide public stages where fashion parades itself, the famous 5 o'clock promenade in Hyde Park, a daily event during the season, carriages and riders circling along designated paths, everyone displaying their finest clothes and equipages, seeing and being seen. The most fashionable riders attract attention, their outfits copied, their companions noted, their every gesture observed and commented upon. To be seen riding in the park is to be someone. To be absent is to risk being forgotten, the visibility a constant requirement that allows no rest. The shops of London offer temptations unknown in the countryside, windows displaying luxuries from around the world, silks and spices, jewelry and books, objects beautiful and useless, desirable simply because they are expensive and rare, the wealthy shop accompanied by servants to carry purchases, spending sums that would keep working families fed for months on trinkets they will use once or never. The shopping itself a form of entertainment and a demonstration of financial power. The shopkeepers know their wealthy customers, extending credit freely, knowing that payment will eventually come even if delayed by quarters or years, the debt less important than maintaining the relationship that brings profitable business. The charitable obligations of wealth are on display during the London season. Benefit concerts and subscription balls, donations to hospitals and schools, public demonstrations of generosity that serve both altruistic and self-interested purposes. The wealthy are expected to support worthy causes, their contributions published in newspapers, their names associated with fashionable charities. The giving is genuine but also strategic, a way of maintaining social position, of being seen as virtuous, of discharging obligations that wealth brings. The amounts given are substantial in absolute terms but modest relative to the donor's wealth, charity more about visibility than sacrifice. The season exhausts even those who enjoy it. The constant activity and late hours, the pressure to maintain appearances and navigate social complexities, the sheer physical demands of dressing and undressing multiple times daily, of standing in ballrooms for hours, of making conversation with people you barely know, and pretending interest in topics that bore you profoundly. By late summer, everyone is ready to escape back to country estates, to the slower rhythms and genuine rest that rural life permits. The return to the country is gradual exodus, families departing as the season winds down, the city emptying as summer heat makes London less pleasant and country estates more appealing. The journey back reverses the journey to London. carriages loaded with purchases and acquisitions from the season's shopping, servants exhausted from months of urban labor, family members settling into seats with relief and anticipation, ready to be home. The estate welcomes them back, house aired and cleaned by staff who arrived ahead to make everything ready. Gardens in summer bloom, familiar landscapes a comfort after months in the city. There is genuine pleasure in being home, in sleeping in one's own bed, in walking familiar paths, in the privacy and space that London's crowded rented houses could not provide. The rhythm shifts back to country time, slower and more contemplative, days measured by meals and walks rather than constant social obligations. Yet the return also brings a certain melancholy, an awareness that the season's excitement and novelty are over, that the months ahead will be quiet and repetitive, that the very pleasures of country life, the peace and space and natural beauty, can themselves become monotonous. The wealthy who complained of London's exhausting pace now complain of the country's dullness, forgetting in each place what they disliked about the other, never quite satisfied regardless of location. The autumn brings shooting season, the sporting calendar that structures country life as the social calendar structures the London season. The men gather for shoots, walking fields and woods with guns and dogs, killing birds in numbers that seem excessive even by the era's standards. The dead game hung and displayed as trophies before being prepared for table. The shoot is more social event than practical hunting, opportunity for men to gather without women, to compete in marksmanship and endurance, to drink and talk and temporarily escape domestic confines. The women left behind occupy themselves with their own pursuits, visiting among neighboring estates, working on projects that occupy hands while minds wander, beginning the planning for house parties and holiday entertainments that will fill the calendar through autumn and winter. There is reading and correspondence, needlework and watercolors, the gentle occupations considered suitable for ladies of quality, none of them particularly engaging but all of them acceptable ways to pass time. The cycle turns and turns again, seasons following seasons, years accumulating until a lifetime has passed in this round of city and country, social obligations and rural retreat, the same patterns repeating with only small variations. The wealthy grow old in these houses and on these estates, their children repeating the patterns they established, inheriting not just property but ways of life, assumptions about what is proper and possible, limitations disguised as traditions. And through it all the servants work, the invisible hands that make the visible world function, their labor sustaining a system that depends on their service while offering them little beyond subsistence wages and the harsh security of knowing their place. The servants have their own stories, their own dreams and disappointments, their own resistance and accommodation to the roles assigned them. But these stories are rarely recorded, lost to history except for fragments in account books and letters, mentions in passing that hint at full lives lived in the margins of someone else's grand narrative. The estate persists beyond any individual life, the land itself the true continuity, outlasting families and fashions, surviving economic transformations. What seems permanent in any moment proves temporary when viewed across centuries. The great houses falling into ruin or adaptation, the families dying out or declining, the wealth dispersing or transforming into new forms. Only the land remains, scarred by human use but essentially unchanged, waiting for whatever comes next. This is the world of Regency wealth at its fullest extent, examined in detail that reveals both grandeur and emptiness, privilege and constraint, beauty built on labor and inequality defended as natural order. It is a world that fascinates because it is both foreign and familiar, different enough to seem exotic but similar enough in its human concerns to remain comprehensible. The people who inhabited this world were neither better nor worse than people in any era, simply products of their time and place, doing their best to make sense of lives shaped by forces they did not fully understand or control. As this examination draws to its close, as the details accumulate into a picture that is both comprehensive and incomplete, as we prepare to step back from this vanished world and return to our own, perhaps what remains most striking is the simple humanity that persists through all the elaborate social construction. Beneath the costumes and conventions, behind the performances and protocols, were people experiencing the universal human conditions of love and loss, hope and disappointment, connection and isolation. They worried about their children and their health, their relationships and their futures. They found joy in small pleasures and beauty in their surroundings. They endured pain and grief, celebrated triumphs and mourned failures. They were, in the end, simply human, trying to make lives worth living within the constraints their era provided, succeeding and failing in the ways humans always succeed and fail, leaving behind evidence of their passage that allows us to know them, however imperfectly, across the distance of 2 centuries. So now, as the candles burn low one final time, as the fires collapse into embers, as the great house settles into the deep quiet that precedes dawn, we take our leave of this world, carrying with us whatever insights or entertainment it has provided, grateful for the glimpse into lives so different from our own yet recognizable in their fundamental humanity. The Regency wealthy fade back into history where they belong, their world preserved in books and buildings, paintings and letters, objects that survive their makers to tell stories that continue as long as anyone remains to read them. Sleep comes at last, dreamless and deep, rest earned through the long journey across time and circumstance. Tomorrow we wake in our own world with its own challenges and comforts, but tonight we have walked through another era, seen through other eyes, lived for a few hours in a world that no longer exists, except in imagination and historical record. And perhaps that journey, that act of imaginative transportation across time is itself valuable. Reminder that our own world is not inevitable or eternal, that other ways of living have existed, and others will come, that we are all simply passing through, making what we can of the time and place we are given, leaving traces for those who will come after to find and interpret and make their own.